o'clock, so I welcome everybody to this City Planning Committee meeting for the 4th of April. We have committee members, Councillor Coates, Councillor Harvey, Councillor Dutta, Alderman Barakis, Alderman Briscoe and myself. And I just advise that that audio and video of this meeting is being recorded and live streamed to the community via the City of Hobart YouTube channel. And if there's any elected member present who has not yet signed in to the meeting in accordance with COVID-19 Safe Plan, please do so now. Well, I think we just do that automatically, don't we? But I request that all mobile devices be either turned off or put to silent. I'd like to acknowledge that we meet on the land for which the Muanina people were custodians for many generations, and pay respects to elders past and present of the Tasmanian Aboriginal community of Tasmania, La Truita. So we have no apologies, we have no leave of absence. Can I have somebody confirm the minutes? Councillor Dutta, thank you. Is there any dissent? No dissent. I declare that carried. Item 3 is consideration of supplementary items, and we do have one on the agenda. Thank you, Alderman Barakis. Those in favour? Those against? The item's carried. Indications of pecuniary and conflicts of interest? No. Transfer of agenda items. Any transfers? No. Item 6, Planning Authority items with deputations, so we'll consider those first. Can I have somebody move that? Thank you, Alderman Barakis. Those in favour? Aye. Those against? The item is carried. So item 7, Committee acting as a planning authority, and we'll go to item on the supplementary agenda, supplementary item 11, which is 7 South Street, Battery Point, partial demolition alterations. And we have the representative, Sam East. Ms East, would you like to come to the table? And if you could talk into the microphone, please, so that the folks at home can hear. You can take a seat there. 5 minutes to address the committee, and then if we have any questions, we'll ask them of you after that. Thank you.
Dear members of the Hobart City Council Planning Committee, hello. As the owner of 9 South Street, I thank you for the opportunity to address issues raised by DA Plan 22125. You will now be fully familiar with the issues raised in earlier representations, but I wish to bring your attention to wider concerns. Notwithstanding, this matter was added on Friday as a late addition to tonight's agenda, so I hope I am fully prepared for you. This development application clearly does not comply with the requirements of the relevant planning scheme. It was therefore assessed against hurdles which were much easier to clear to meet acceptable solutions. Approval or rejection of this DA is therefore discretionary. Let us consider what is faced by a consultant, planner or architect advising a client on a potential development application. All too often their frame of mind is to not even attempt to design a plan that meets the requirements of the planning scheme, but to fully explore the much greater scope and try to meet the acceptable solutions, even if only just meeting the acceptable solutions. A Hobart City Council planner apparently then does not have to wait and assess and consider representations objecting, but can assert that because the acceptable solutions are met, or sometimes can be considered to have been met, even if not fully met, the development application will be recommended for approval. No ifs or buts. In many suburbs, this administrative, easy railroading of DAs will cause minimal inconvenience to neighbours, as building lots are of a decent size, but that is clearly not the case in Battery Point, particularly South Street, where lot sizes are often tiny, minute. Case in point, My beloved heritage-listed home at 9 South Street is on a very narrow lot of only 110 square metres. The DA proposed at 7 South Street is for a much wider and larger lot of 173 square metres. To have a looming 3.08 metre high concrete wall of, as per the DA, unspecified length, built on our northern boundary will clearly unreasonably and adversely affect the light to and the amenity of our only narrow private open space and cause great loss of sunlight to our living space at various times of the day and year. Council staff had already assessed that the DA should be recommended for approval because it met the acceptable solutions. But acceptable to whom? These acceptable solutions are based purely on the proposed extensions to the property at 7 South Street. Any representations not yet received would not alter that decision, I was told. I invite members of the Planning Committee to visit our small and super narrow lot, 6 metres wide, and assess whether the DA recommended for approval could be considered an acceptable solution for the health and wellbeing of ratepayers living at 9 South Street, or an unreasonable imposition upon our amenity. Planning Authority clearly has the absolute discretion to refuse the DA as lodged, and I can only ask that this Planning Committee first and the Planning Authority later closely examine whether this discretionary power can be used for the greater good to forge a more acceptable solution by way of mediation, for example. I live in hope and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Now I open it to the committee for questions. We'll start with you, Alderman Briscoe.
Thank you. Thank you for that. You're aware that there was a previous application that had no representation for the same plan and it just lapsed? This is on page 24.
I was told that when I met with the planning officer last Tuesday inside the notification period. If I'd seen this plan in the previous form, no, I'd still be objecting to it. So no, I have not been aware of that.
So you weren't living there 3 years ago?
I have rented it out over the years. Yeah, I'm a single parent, so there has been, it's possible, but I have not seen that DA.
Oh, right, okay, because why it's before us is because the permit for the same development ran out.
Okay.
Thanks.
Any further questions? Councillor Harvey?
So what sort of engagement have you had with the neighbour?
None.
Mm-hmm.
So that is part of my gripe a little bit is we're cordial. She has my telephone number, I have hers. Yeah, there's been no, there was one conversation across the fence, it was a couple of years ago where she told me that someone was drawing up, planning, conceiving a glass house. That's the only conversation.
So you would have liked to have had a bit more thorough and in-depth conversation, and also you think you intimated you'd like to have some mediation to see if we can.
Yeah, it would have been nice if it happened before this. Yeah, so it didn't come to this. But because it is my northern boundary, my house was built as a firewall for the street, so the whole north is, yeah, 3 bricks dense of red bricks, so there is no northern light, and that is the nature of the street and probably the areas. They're cold, they're dark, they don't get a lot of light. I understand wanting to extend to look for light, but it's just the imposition to everyone else is, I don't think it's fair.
Further questions? So I just have a couple of questions, and I did go and visit and look from your property, and I believe your fence is probably half the height now.
6 metres paling fence is currently, yeah, in this place.
6 feet.
1.6. Oh yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, and obviously there are no shadow diagrams associated with this application. Do you have an idea as to how much light you're likely to lose from your private open space?
I don't know. I mean, I would have liked to see shadow diagrams. That was also something that I thought would be obligatory when, you know, putting forward a DA with this sort of, you know, building on your northern boundary, my northern.
So the plans have, you know, like it's an atrium type extension, but it's a hard wall against that that southern boundary of their property. If there's any potential to bring that down a little, that might help.
Yes, I don't begrudge her wanting to enjoy sunlight. It's, yeah, but I also don't want to lose a lot of mine. That's the only light into our,
Yeah, no, I understand that with such a small backyard that you have, you kind of, and that's where the sun's coming from. And finally, you just talked a bit about mediation. So if the committee were of a mind to have both parties talk with each other, which is not a statutory process, but can be done if it helps with an outcome, then it's something that you would be willing to do. Yep. Okay. Thank you. Any further questions? No further questions. So if you'd like to take your seat again, thank you for your deputation. And I'll open the item for discussion. Alderman Barakis.
Thank you, Chair. And just through you to the Director, just for the benefit of the room, can you outline why the shadow diagrams wouldn't have been required in this case?
Yes, through you, Chair. The only discretions associated with this the provision of open space, heritage, and also stormwater. Building envelope, adjacent residential amenity is not a discretion in this instance.
Thank you. Councillor Dutta.
Thank you, Chair. The other question I have is with regards to the expiry of this. Is it possible for us to defer it so that there is some discussion, conversation, mediation?
It expires on the 20th of April.
Yeah. Through you, Chair. Look, we have had conversation, officers have had a conversation with the applicant in relation to the scope of lowering that wall and still achieving a compliant building form, and they are prepared to entertain a reduced common wall, that southern wall, provided it meets the relevant building standards. So we have had that conversation, so there would be scope to entertain a condition to that effect. What that would mean in practice, I think, hence the condition, I think they need to go away and investigate how low it can come down. It may be 200 mils, it may be in that order.
20 centimetres.
Yeah, 20 centimetres.
So did that answer your question
in
relation to mediation? Yep. Okay. Alderman Barakis.
Thank you. So just to clarify that through you to the Director, you're not talking about us deferring this, you're talking about placing a condition on top of this that we approve this tonight, but then they
That's right.
have some talks about the heights and stuff.
That's right. They would then need to come back with an additional plan to my satisfaction that achieves that reduction in height of that wall, provided it maintains compliance with the building code, which is required anyway.
Yeah, I was initially going to say I'm not sure what the benefit would be in going down that road. But if the applicant's willing to come to the table and have those conversations, I'm happy to move the recommendation with the addition of that condition that they undergo some mediation and an outcome to the satisfaction of the Director is reached. Or wording, such wording to be suggested by the Director.
Yep, thank you. So you're moving the motion with that, but for discussions not between the parties. Or you're talking about between the parties?
I was talking about exactly what the director suggested, so I'm happy to let him explain it a bit.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Harvey.
Just with regard to the reduction in height of that boundary wall, I'm just looking at page 12 of the agenda, and there's clearly I guess you'd call it the top of the wall, the parapet or whatever you want to call it. So that could be reduced to the roof line potentially.
Yeah.
And is that roof line sloping towards number 9, or is it like that, or is it a pitch?
Stormwater thing, yeah.
Like,
Yeah, if I may,
Yes,
Chair.
yeah, go ahead.
It slopes towards the boundary, that section of the roof.
so it's a pitch from
yeah,
the clear.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
So we've had the chance to draft a condition, if I may read it out for your
thank you.
benefit. The height of the external wall immediately adjacent to the boundary between 7 South Street and 9 South Street must be reduced in height so that it is the minimum allowed by the National Construction Code and to the satisfaction of the Director of City Planning.
So potentially, if that little bit of wall there was reduced down to the level of the roof,
That's right.
it would need a gutter rather than up against the wall where
That's
it would drain off. So there might be
There'll be a required to have a wall of some sorts. How high it needs to go, I don't believe it needs to go above
To accommodate
the roof
the
line.
drainage, yeah.
That's right. But look, I've put the qualifier in there because there may be some scope to reduce the internal ceiling height, for example. So
Yeah.
there may be ways of
Yeah.
accommodating that.
But okay. But that said, that condition is mandatory. But the overall application complies, and there's no rationale for refusal because it's satisfied the.
That's correct. In fact, I wouldn't be comfortable necessarily imposing this condition if we didn't have the support of the applicant. Because, the planners have clearly argued that the wall is compliant, but I think the applicant is keen to try and reach, a compromise in this instance. And this is his approach to achieving that outcome.
Okay, thank you.
Further discussion. Alderman Briscoe.
I just want to clarify, because I'm still a little confused about where the drainage for that side extension is. Is the roof like that? I'll just ask the director through you, Chair. So the roof is like that, is it? Part of it goes towards the internal. And
That's correct.
So there would have to become some kind of drain along that edge anyway, would it?
That's correct.
And how close would it have to go on the inside of the wall?
It has to go on the inside of the wall. That's correct.
Thank you.
Further discussion. I'll just, I think there, whilst we know that Battery Point is very closely built, it's one of the early suburbs, and the yards are quite small, and the house next door used to be a shop, so probably an even smaller backyard possibly, but still, of that pattern along South Street, it's not atypical. Having the building or development criteria to allow a solid wall, which is going to be close to 3 metres, if subject to this condition anyway, on that northern aspect, I think is really disappointing that it doesn't even consider the amenity really of the people next door. So it's quite a difficult one. I know I have sympathy for the applicant, but I also have sympathy for the neighbour who is directly impacted on this. Director, can you just describe how long that sort of pattern of allowances, you know, to allow to build to the fence line effectively? Has that always been the case in Battery Point?
Yes, look, it has. Under the Battery Point planning scheme, there was no building envelopes required, and it was sort of the traditional heritage considerations took priority. And so in introducing the interim planning scheme, it was a simple translation of our policy position within the Battery Point planning scheme across to the new scheme. So,
and so, has there been any change with the planning scheme changes that has reduced that setback?
Not so far as the Battery Point scheme is concerned. There was in the
General City of Hobart
that's
planning
right.
scheme.
Yeah,
Right. Okay.
There was.
Yes, and it's also unfortunate that this is a supplementary agenda item, and it's come to us. It's only we hear this often of representors possibly only hearing about it for the first time, albeit it has been advertised. It was re-advertised again.
That's
so,
right.
you know, whatever the situation, being on top of planning that's happening in the neighbourhood is really the only thing that I can suggest. All right, on that note, we have the amended motion from Alderman Barakis. I'll put that. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? No. Show of hands.
Alderman Briscoe, Alderman Barakis, Councillor Harvey, Councillor Coates,
And those against?
Councillor Dutton, Deputy Lord Mayor.
So it's the motion is carried, and there will be a slight amendment to that. So we now go to item 7.1.1. So this is an application under the Sullivan's Cove planning scheme. It's 8 to 9 Sackville Street. Open the item for discussion.
I'll move that, Chair.
Thanks, Alderman Barakis. Discussion. Any discussion? Has everybody got the motion? If there's no other comments in relation to 8-9 Sackville Street, I'll put that. Those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Those against? No. Show of hands.
Alderman Briscoe, Alderman Barakis and Councillor Coates,
Those against?
Councillor Dutton, Councillor Harvey and Deputy Lord Mayor.
Okay, so expiry date's the 5th of April.
Fall to me, Chair.
Right, okay. So
What's the outcome of that, Chair?
it was a tied vote, and the decision will be made by the director, and presumably the director will go on the basis of the recommendation. Item 7.2.1, which is application under the Hobart Interim Planning Scheme. So this, I think, was discussed when I was away, and I thank Alderman Barakis for chairing the meeting. So I'll open the item for discussion. Alderman Briscoe.
It's just a question first.
Yes.
You, to the director. Have you got conditions for a refusal?
Director?
I'd like to move the conditions for refusal now. This has got a big history. We discussed it in full at the last council meeting, last planning meeting, and I think I don't wish to discuss it anymore. But it was clear to me from the last planning meeting and subsequent correspondence and communication I've been with the applicant and some neighbours that I think we should refuse this. And I don't think we can refuse just one chimney, we have to refuse the whole lot. Yep, thanks.
Thank you. Further discussion?
Just a question.
Councillor
through you,
Data.
Chair. It is my understanding that this was deferred and there was going to be some discussion between the neighbour and the applicant. I'm wondering, did that eventuate?
Look, I don't believe there were discussions between the neighbour and the applicant, but there certainly were discussions between officers and both parties, and I think there was general agreement that compromise could not be met, and the applicant was keen for the proposal to be considered as presented.
Further discussion? Alderman Barakis.
Yeah, Chair, I'm really torn on this one because I completely see and sympathise with what the neighbours are saying and the what's been suggested here. And it would have been nice if we could have had some movement on that one chimney. Just going over and reading the material that we've been given, as frustrating as it is, I just personally can't see how this doesn't comply with the provisions that we have in front of us. Doesn't mean I like it, because I don't like it, but it would have been nice to have found some sort of common ground there, such as what we did on the item a minute ago. But look, I think if we do reject this, the outcome will be very predictable. And I'll reluctantly vote for the officer's recommendation on this. I'm not happy about it, but I don't think there's really another choice here for me.
All right, thank you. Any further discussion? If not, I'll put the motion with reasons of refusal, which you've heard, moved by Alderman Briscoe. Those in favour? Aye. Those against?
No.
Show of hands. Those in favour?
Alderman Briscoe, Councillor Dupper, and the Deputy Lord Mayor, and Councillor Coates.
Those against?
Alderman Barakis and Councillor Harvey.
So that's carried. And so that will go to full council, I take it?
That's correct.
Yep. So that will be considered at full council as this recommendation for refusal. We move now to 7.2.2, which is 5 Montrevale Rise, and it's 3 multiple dwellings. Open the item for discussion. Alderman Barakis.
I'm happy to move that, Chair.
Thank you. Discussion or any questions of the Director? Councillor Harvey.
Director, when I looked at the designs of this, in my mind I could see 6 units rather than 3 units. Each of those floors had a kitchen. It was, fully operational as a separate dwelling, and the entry points are external as well, and the only connection is via an outdoor spiral staircase on the decks to the front. So what sort of assurance do we have that this is not actually 6 units rather than 3 units?
Yeah, look, through you, Chair, when I saw it, I must admit I was a little concerned. We have imposed a condition. I mean, you can have kitchenettes, in a dwelling. We have indicated by condition that it is 3 dwellings, not 6. So any efforts to subsequently change that would necessitate a new application, and there'd be discretions associated with that. So, yes, it was a little bit unusual, I have to say.
It also seems that the heat's gone out of this area. There was only, I think, 2 representations, was it, or was it 3? 3.
But yeah, they were really about the building process rather than the number of dwellings. That's right. I think it gets to that point sometimes, doesn't it?
Yeah. And what was the original intent? One more final question, Deputy Lord Mayor.
Yep.
What was the original intent of these subdivisions? They're all supposed to be single allotments, were they? Or there's been some consternation about some having multiple units on them already. So obviously this one was, I don't know, they were able to put 3 on this one.
Yeah, look, I think they're always going to be subject to the provisions of the scheme of the day. I don't think that there was necessarily any covenants or restrictions that were applied at the time of the subdivision. I think it was there was some debate at the time, if I do recall, but I think it was generally agreed that the scheme should dictate the density, not at the time when the development occurred, not necessarily the views of council at the time the subdivision was approved.
Any further discussion? Alderman Briscoe?
Just a question through you to the Director. So my reading of this is towards the top of this subdivision. Oh, this, yep. So it's not. Is it not as steep as the bottom, or am I reading the contour lines wrong?
I think there's very little area that isn't steep in that subdivision.
I thought it might have been just on the rise.
No, look, my understanding, reading of the officer's report, is that it is. This is quite steep in places, but there will be a significant excavation to accommodate the new structures, and the access is such that it goes somewhat across the contours,
yes,
as opposed to perpendicular to the contour. So access is relatively achievable given the proximity to the bend in that driveway, in that road.
I always thought, Director, that I always use Nicholas Drive as the worst possible place to build houses, and I think probably this would actually be worse. Anyway, obviously they can get, it's economic, it appears, close to the city, so I suppose we've got to improve it.
Chair, I also note that it says it's within 400 metres of the bus stop. Yeah, I can imagine some...
There should be a gradient
going down
coefficient
the hill.
on that.
Getting back up the hill.
There's not many buses at DV Waterworks Road anyway.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, I don't think that... You'd need to have a bank of scooters, yeah.
Any further discussion? I note that there is a Part 5 agreement which is requires the owners to comply with the site development plan and has various conditions there. But I'm just wondering, you know, as far as the geotechnical analysis, has there been, like, it's a fairly fragile area. We've had rock falls in that area. Is it to your satisfaction, Director, that's covered?
Yeah, look, I've had some experience, and the officers have had some experience with construction in this subdivision, and concerns, and rightful concerns expressed by residents in the area, particularly around rock movements during construction. We have imposed a condition requiring relevant construction management plan satisfying the relevant Australian standards around safety. So I think we've imposed, you know, the relevant conditions, and as I said, we do have some experience with the concerns that were conveyed by the representatives, rightly so, and we think we've conditioned it appropriately.
Okay, thank you. All right, if there's no further discussion, I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Those against? Items carried. 8.1 is report, City Planning Advertising Report. Thank you, Alderman Barakis. Anything of note there, Ms Abbey?
Yes, thank you, Chair. There are a number of quite big applications being advertised at the moment. The most notable being one of the most notable, the UTAS forestry building, which was mentioned at the last meeting. We've also, there's a new KFC proposed on Harrington Street, which was in the paper this morning. There's a mixed use, including residential, on 156 Newtown Road. I should mention some of these aren't actually on the advertising list that are included with the agenda papers. They're ones that have gone onto advertising since that list was produced.
Yep.
There's also a whisky distillery at Hugh and Keys. So that's adjacent to the tram museum, which was recently approved.
Right, and no football oval.
Well,
That all gets swamped by the footy over.
Importantly, that one will see that site refurbished, that historic building.
Yep. Okay, all right. So you've moved it?
Whiskey.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yes. I'll put that. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? Items carried. Delegated decision report from planning. Alderman Barakis, thank you. No real comments here. I'll put that. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? Item is carried. Questions without notice. Alderman Briscoe.
Yes. When will the Melville Street Old Forestry Building come before this committee?
We understand it'll be the 26th of April.
On that, will the ex-Freedom shop be included in that development application, or is that a separate one?
My understanding is that it's included.
Both.
Any further questions without notice? If not, I'll ask that somebody move the closed portion. Thank you, Alderman Barakis. Those in favour? Those against? Items carried, and I thank those people who've been listening